Is this working?
Oh,
Yeah.
All
right. Well, welcome back. Good afternoon. I have two quick announcements before we get started. One, neither of which are particularly good pieces of news. One is that I messed up the in the syllabus where the reading of Hampden was supposed to be the second one. You may have noticed that one of the reading questions was about Hampden, but the question referred to a piece of Hampden that's on the syllabus to be read for Tuesday. Doesn't really matter that much. It's only a 4-page reading, but it was supposed to be there for today. When I changed it around, I placed that in the wrong date. So that's just stupid on my part, but there you go. So if people were confused, you had a right to be confused because it was confusing. That's one. The other thing is, so I announced the talk by Doc Husak for today. That's canceled, unfortunately. He had to pull out because of the impending snow blizzard stuff. Like, probably wouldn't. Yeah, it's they say somewhat this evening. So campus might be closed tomorrow, and flights might not be leaving. So anyway, we'll be rescheduling him. It looks like for February 18. I'll let you know. Hope you come. He's a really interesting guy. So. But anyway, so if you were planning on coming, now you have an opening at 4. I hope that means all of you. All right. That's what I have to get out of the way. Does anyone of you have any? Is there anything else I've done that's confusing or wrong?
So the Hampden reading?
Don't take it too personally.
That's for Tuesday, right?
Yeah, well, both. Yeah, yes and no. There's no good answer because I listed it for Tuesday. It should have been listed for today. It won't matter too much because it'll be relevant for Tuesday's discussion too. And we'll talk a little bit about Hampden towards the end of today, but that'll be about the first reading of Hampden. So if you didn't read it, you're not in trouble in any way. Not in trouble with me, but also not in trouble with following today's discussion. Yeah. So did that help?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, well, we left off last time with our working through the prisoner's dilemma. There's a couple of steps, right, to the argument here that we've been looking at. One is just a general analysis of the prisoner's dilemma. We spent some time trying to get our head around how that is supposed to be working. And then there's, of course, the further step, which is Hobbes's claim that the state of nature will be, in fact, a prisoner's dilemma. Right? That in the state of nature we'll find ourselves in that type of situation. So there's one, it's just the analysis of the situation itself, and then there's the question of does this analysis correctly describe what life would be like without government. Now, it's generally accepted that things like prisoner's dilemmas of the kind that Hobbes describes exist. Right? These type of situations, we can find ourselves in them, and when we do find ourselves in them, thanks. They're pretty nasty. It's okay. No, I appreciate it. It's supposed to reduce the sound. So they exist, right? So when they happen, you get pretty bad outcomes. And it's generally accepted that you get pretty bad outcomes because of the incentives that different people are faced with, right? And so what you have is you have each individual person doing what within their context of their decision situation, from their perspective, looks like they're a completely reasonable way to act. But overall, you get a really bad outcome. So generally speaking, things like pollution, for example, often result of prisoner dilemma type situations. Something that, like a simple example is often people talk about global warming as the result of this type of situation. Every country, if you think about attack and not attack as representing pollute or not pollute, right? Every individual country has an incentive to pollute because they're not quite sure what the others will do. Now, everyone might prefer that nobody really pollutes to a dangerous degree. But then again, maybe if you cut back, then the other ones keep blowing it up. And then actually it turns out, well, even if they do cut back, then you have a free ride, right? So you can keep polluting all you want and get all the benefits that that brings. And so the result is nobody wants to cut back, even though all of us want to cut back. And that's the strange thing about the prisoner's dilemma, right? So we said this, right? Go back to the attacking situation. Two people, right, strangers in the state of nature, come across each other. Hobbes says, what happens? They both look at each other askance, right? And they think, what am I going to do? Am I safe or am I not safe? Right? And you don't know. And because you don't know, you have your two options, attack or not attack. And the attack option becomes the dominant option. Because here's your rankings. You said the best thing for you to do is to take them out before they take you out. Otherwise, there was always this danger walking around. Or it's not necessarily danger, it's a potential danger. Okay? So you have to worry at least that this person might be dangerous to you. And if you walk away and they attack you, then you're guaranteed to be dead. So that's your worst option. You want to avoid that, right? It'd be best if you could both be peaceful, because then you wouldn't have to expend so much energy. You wouldn't have to worry so much. You might just be able to spend some time doing other things and so on, right? But you can't afford to do that. So since this is your ranking, we said here is your decisions situation. You get to choose whether you're up or down, above or below the blue line. The choice is static, so you choose without knowing or really having to influence what the other will choose. So you choose in isolation, each of you. So you have no influence over what they do. They might attack or might not attack. You don't know. And you can't afford to find out. Right? So you have to make a decision. You attack or you not attack. So what do? You look at these as, as a coin toss. You get two coins. Which one do you want to flip? One coin has one side 1, one side 3. The other one has two sides, one side 2, the other side number 4 in terms of the best possible outcome. So which one do you toss? Well, you toss this one, right? I could calculate it for you in terms of expected value if you want. You could think about it as a coin toss. Let's say the best option is you get $100 if heads hit, and your second best option is $75. This would be $50. This would be $25, for example. You can say, so you have the 50% shot of $100 or $50. So 150 divided by 2, 75 expected. Right? Here you have a 50% shot of $75 or $25. That's 100 divided by 2 is 50. Right? So your expected value is 50. 75 beats 50, so you go up. That's the mathematical version of doing it. But common sense will tell you the same. All right, so that's the setup. It's rational to attack no matter what the other does. So attack is the dominant strategy. That's just a technical term that people say. It's dominant in the sense that it just beats every other strategy. Okay? In this case, you only have two strategies, not attack and attack. But so attack is the dominant strategy in the sense that it just beats it. So for everyone, attack is what they will end up doing. Or at least in this case, your decision will be to attack. Are we good so far? Right? So the idea is here, it's rational for you to attack, right? Given the situation that you're in. Of course, we still have that puzzling thing that it's also rational for both of us to not attack together, right? But that's why this is an analysis of why non-evil people might end up doing things that look pretty evil, namely fight each other and try to kill each other. Right? That's the paradox. Savoy? Static just means it's just a description of what the type of decision is. So sometimes this is language from game theory, but it doesn't matter. You have two types of choices, dynamic choices and static choices. And dynamic is where the choice that you make depends on what the other person is doing. Right? So if I can wait to see what you're doing first, for example, if I can afford to wait and see what you're doing, I might make my choice sensitive to what you're doing. Right? So I might let it depend. I might say, well, I'll attack if he also looks like he's going to attack. Or I might not attack if he looks like he's not going to attack. Right? Or we might talk about it. Right? I might strike a deal or something. Those are dynamic choices. In static choices, as in the prisoner's dilemma, you don't know really what's going on. You just have to make your choice. And so what you do is you just tally up the odds, right? Like, well, what are the probabilities? Let's say it's 50% each. And that's what I was doing with the money, right? So That's why it's called the prisoner's dilemma. The whole the classic example of the prisoner's dilemma is about how the police try to coax confessions from suspects, right? So you have two people who are suspected of a crime. You put them in separate rooms, and you say, we'll offer you a deal if you confess, right? If you rat out the other person, right? And you tell the other person the same thing, right? And so they don't know what the other one is doing, so they have to do the same calculation, right? Well, I rat him out. Well, what if he's ratting me out? Well, then I better talk, right? But what if he's not ratting me out? Well, I can get a sweet deal by ratting him out, so I should rat him out anyway, right? And that's the idea is the police is trying to play you out against each other. Hence the prisoner's dilemma. They're both in a dilemma. And they end up ratting each other out, which is terrible for both. Now both go to prison, right? That's the idea. Of course, that's exactly what the police wants to achieve. But for the prisoners, it's a dilemma. And that's it's the same forms of situation, right? So we have it with global warming type things. We have it with state of nature fighting. We have it with confessing or not confessing at the police station. And this type of situation can appear in various contexts. Okay. So that's just, here we're just describing it from your position, right? So your decision is you get to choose above the line or below the line, and that's just that. That's all you get to control. So here is just a matrix that you might have seen this before. This is a game theory matrix. This shows you why you'll end up both attacking and both in a bad situation. It's just a way of describing the situation, not from your own perspective. The previous one was just you individually, right? But here's two people. So you and they, right? Whoever you and the other person you're coming across. And both of you have two options. So it's two people, you, they. Each have the option to attack or not attack, or attack or not attack. Right? And so we can combine those four possible outcomes. Both attack, that's this box here. Both do not attack, that's this box here. Then we have you attack and they do not attack, then we're up here, right? And vice versa, they attack, you do not attack, then we're down here. Right? And so the box describes how good each combination of actions is for both of us. That's what these numbers represent, right? So number 1 is your best option, number 4 is your worst. So simple way to read this, right? Like, okay, let's say that I attack and they do not attack. Well, this number here represents me, like you, right? So that's 1, that's your best outcome. This number there represents they, so for them that's the worst possible outcome. Suppose that we both attack. Well, for me that's number 3, right? Pretty bad. For them also number 3, pretty bad. Not attack, each gets 2. And I do not attack and they do attack. Well, I get you, right? You get number 4. It's the worst possible outcome that you don't attack while they do attack because you're getting killed in the back, right? And they get number 1 because it's the best for them. They don't they're not hurt. They don't have to worry about you anymore. It's a good day at the office. Right? Okay. These matrices are useful because they can show you why some situations, certain outcomes are stable. So just like before, right? We ranked before. It's like, hey, what do you do? What do you do? Attack or not attack? Well, when we don't know what the other one is going to do, we have to choose for ourselves independently of what the other is going to do. We have to compare what will happen if I attack. On one case, they also attack. In the other case, not attack. Compared to what will happen if I don't attack in one case and the other. So you can compare these two cases in terms of the alternatives, right? Let's say that they attack. Right? Like you don't know what they're going to do. So imagine for a moment that they attack. What are you better off doing? Attacking. Good. Why? Right. And in terms of of this thing here, Alan, do you want to take a shot? Why is it better for you to attack?
Because if you look at the results, getting 3 is better than getting 4.
Right, exactly. So if they attack, right, then we're definitely in this left column here, right? So you don't get to decide which of the columns gets selected. That's their choice, right? So we're definitely in the left. So all you get to decide is whether it's the left upper box or well, they always say like the northwestern or the southwestern box, right? So you get to choose that. Well, you choose northwestern, right? Like, yeah, exactly. 3 beats 4. Okay, that's one possibility. You don't get to control that. So there's always the other possibility that they don't attack. Well, if they don't attack, you still attack, right? Because 1 beats 2. And so for you, from your point of view, turns out it doesn't matter at all what the other person does. I should attack regardless. Right? So that's just another way of describing what we just saw, right? Like if you compare the two options, that's your best deal. If they attack, I ought to attack. If they do not attack, I still ought to attack. It's a simple choice. Right? Now, from their point of view, the situation is exactly the same, right? And that's what makes this interesting. It's like for them, we compare these numbers, right? So they think, well, I don't know if they're going to attack or not attack. Let's assume for a moment that they attack. Then we're in the top half of the matrix, right? That's what you get to decide, whether you're up or down. They only get to decide left or right. So we forget for a moment the bottom half. So they attack, what do? Well, if I attack, I get 3. If I don't attack, I get 4, so I attack. Right? And of course, the other way around, if they don't attack, then we're in the bottom half. And so if I attack, I get 1. If they don't attack, they get 2. I should attack. Oh, they think, simple choice, doesn't matter what you do, I ought to attack anyway. Right? Which means both are going to think, they don't have to do a lot of thinking, they don't have to wait and see, but they attack, right? You attack, it just doesn't matter, so you end up here, right? And that's the crappy war of all against all. In technical terms, this is a Nash equilibrium, means it's perfectly stable outcome. So stable means no, it won't change unless you change something about the situation. If the situation stays constant, the outcome stays constant. The technical idea about the Nash equilibrium is a choice situation is a Nash equilibrium when none of the parties whose choices make up the outcome has any interest in changing their choice. So here, nobody's interested in changing their choices because you can only get worse off, right? 3 makes you go to 4, 3 makes you go to 4. You don't want that. And that's why, so the insider, so you know Nash, you've seen the movie, probably. Have you? Do you know who I'm talking about? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Didn't he die recently?
Not Steve Nash, but sorry?
Didn't he die in a car wreck recently?
Did he?
I think so, yeah. He was with his wife.
John Nash? Did it? Oh.
Sorry, enough of that.
Have to bring down the mood. I'd not heard, well, if he did, I didn't hear it. That was news to me, so I hope not. Well, he's one of the founders of game theory, and so he's one of the first people to explain why situations that look bad for all the people involved might nevertheless be stable. That's a puzzle, right? We talked about this last time a lot. Like, how the hell? Like, why don't we just move there, right? Like, we can all be better off. And we'll get back to it more, but that's a real question, right? Like, why the hell don't we move there? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, right? And Nash was the first one to make precise why, when it doesn't happen, why does it not happen? And his answer is because even though all of us could be better off by moving there, none of us individually has any reason to change our behavior. And if we don't, nobody has a reason to change our behavior, we're probably going to continue behaving the way we do, and that makes the outcome stable. Right? Okay, so individually rational means collectively irrational. So it's collectively irrational to be attacking all the time because everybody could do better. Here's just 2 people, but of course, the same situation can happen with many, many more people. The case of global warming is what we have 173 countries or something like that in the world, so that's a lot bigger, right? But you might have whole societies. Maybe civil wars are like this, right? Where we talked about thousands and thousands, maybe millions of people, where there's so much violence that you can't afford to not be aggressing all the time anymore. Right? If you watch The Walking Dead, you see these type of situations show up all the time, right? Come across a new group. Uh-oh. Right. That's bad news, right? And Hobbes' point is it should be good news because you could have more people live together, have a peaceful society like we have now today, like agriculture, and you can maybe have some services, or you can have some manufacturing and things like that's the way of building a big, but it's not like that, right? It's chaos, right? So. Hobbes's point about the sovereign or the state, of course, is that the state is so great, he says it's such a rational, good deal for you because it does move us from this crappy situation to the better situation, right? And it does it by aligning, we'll see this later, but it does by aligning what is individually rational with what is collectively rational. Now the two are pointing in different directions, right? That's the Nash equilibrium point, right? Everybody could be doing better, yet this is stable. And the reason is that what is good for everybody together is not the same as what is good for us individually. Right? And if those things point in opposite directions, crappy situations arise. And Hobbes's point about life under government is that the government is able to put those two, align them, where what is individually good for us is the same as what is good for us all. So your individual good and the common good become the same thing. But not always. So anyone any questions about this? About how to read a matrix like this or about the general argument? Fair enough? Okay. All right. On these slides, I throw out the occasional Hobbes quote because it's an old piece. There's a lot of text there. So I'm trying to highlight these type of sections where in the reading you can find the arguments that we're discussing, right? So hopefully that will help you study it. That's at least my thought. So Hobbes writes, hereby it's manifest that during the time that men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, right, to stop them from attacking each other, they are in that condition which is called a war. And such a war as is of every man against every man. That's the conclusion, right? And the stuff about the prisoner's dilemma is the argument he gives for why that would be the case. Right? So he gives us analysis of this. And so if things are this violent, we aren't safe, we have no time to devote to other things, where an invader has no more to fear than another man's single power. Right? So if I'm thinking about attacking you and the only thing that's supposed to deter me is you, right? So that's bad news, right? If one plant, sow, build, or possess a convenient seed, others may probably be expected to come prepared with forces united to dispossess and deprive him, not only of the fruits of his labor, but also of his life and liberty. And the invader, again, is in the like danger of another. So two things, right? So if you think, I'm not going to do all this attacking, I'm going to just plant some crops and stuff, you're making yourself into a target, right? So nobody will do this, right? Because that's dangerous. You've got all these nice tomatoes growing, right? Now people start they might see them or they might hear about them, and if they can't take you out by themselves, they might sort of have one of these small little groups that Hobbes thinks can actually survive or be stable. Maybe a family shows up, right? Who can trust each other, and they'll take you out, and it's just so you won't, right? Notice, by the way, here is you can see the idea, the logic of the prisoner's dilemma in Hobbes's mind, right? So he says, so if you build, you're making your convenient seed, you're making your life nice, then others will you can expect the others to come prepared, right, and to kill you. And the invader, again, is in the like danger of the other, right? And you have to think exactly the same. So that's the matrix, right? Like you have to worry about but they have to worry about you as well. And that's, of course, exactly why the situation is so toxic, right? So everybody has to fear everybody. If it was just one person fearing the other, then either you could take out the other, or when the one person was dead, it would be over. But we have to fear each other, right? And so there's this constant fighting. So famously, this is the argument, right? There was one of the reading questions from last time. This is Hobbes' argument for why the state of nature would be so solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So you end up living by yourself, not very well off, no doctors, right? You fall down, you break your leg, that's it. Lots of fighting, and you die early. So one thing that we've seen a couple of times already, but just want to emphasize it, because this is really why Hobbes' argument is so insightful. So like he says, it's the situation, it's not the people. Right? He stresses this. He's like, look, people become violent because of the incentives that they're facing, right? Because of the way, the context, the situation in which they find themselves once they come across each other. So he doesn't say that we're evil and callous. Right? He doesn't say people. He does say like we only, we care about ourselves more than we care about others. So that's, you might think that's callous in some way or whatever, but to some degree probably true. Right? And he does say we are vain, right? We sort of care about our glory and like how our social standing and stuff. We like to dominate over others. And so he doesn't think that we're all angels. But it's not just saying like, hey, people fight all the time because they're a-holes. Right? He's not saying because we're not innately aggressive or something. He can't really say that, right? Because it would be a problem. Because as we'll see later, the way that the government or the sovereign solves the issue is by changing the payoffs, changing the incentives. Now, if we were naturally aggressive, that wouldn't have any effect on us. Right? His point is we just follow the situation that we're in. You change the situation, we're going to change our behavior. If we weren't following the situation, we were following what was inside us, you can't change that, right?
And this is very evident in the fact that when we make laws, they're based on incentive structures. We incentivize people to do something that they otherwise wouldn't do if they didn't have the payoffs. And that's why oftentimes we hear people say, oh, when they're disgruntled about government, well, let's just vote everybody out.
Right.
It's not going to do anything because the institution is set up a certain way where there's a certain set of incentive structures. And as long as those incentives are presented the way they are, then people are going to continue making the same decisions that they are making. And I even went as far to say, if I put you in Congress today, you would be making a lot of the same decisions that the people that you don't like in Congress are making because of the incentive structures. It's not about how good of a person you are
right.
or your morals. It's about what wins the day a lot of times, or what wins the week, or what wins the decade. Right.
So you have there's still whole schools in social science, political science, economics especially, that basically use the way that Hobbes looked at the world as it's just a standard method in economics. It's just to ask the economists to analyze markets and people's sort of economic or consumptive or productive behavior in terms of the incentives that they face. Yeah, it's like what pays. Right? If the price rises of a certain good, the supply will likely increase. Why? Because it pays to start selling your stuff. Right? That's the reason the supply increases. It tends to be true. So, but that's just using this type of rational choice theory. Right? You find that it starts with Hobbes. So here he explicitly actually says this. Right? He says he considers this this example of somebody who would be tempted by the situation. He says, does he, the person who talks about this person, not accuse mankind by his actions as I do by my words? He says, am I accusing people here? Like when I say that they will be so violent. He says, no, neither of us accuses man's nature in it, the desires and other passions of man in themselves, no sin. He says that we want, and the desires here, ultimately it's just that you stay alive, right? He says there's nothing bad about wanting to stay alive. It's following reason, as you'll have seen. And no more are the actions that proceed from those passions. It's like you're doing what's reasonable given the situation, but so it's not the people. Right? Talked a little bit last time about, I think Will, you brought it up, right? Like you might not be able to sleep at night from all the fighting and the killing that you're doing. That your conscience might hurt. Yeah. So I talked a little bit, I said that he mentions, he discusses this. He doesn't really think that this really works. Here's what he writes. So adherence to custom from ignorance of the nature of right and wrong. Right and wrong. Ignorance of the causes and original constitution of right, equity, law, and justice. Dispose a man to make custom and example the rule of his action. He says, look, this is really tricky, really difficult questions, right? Most people don't think about them in philosophical ways. Most people, even if they do, they don't know what truly is just and unjust in sort of like God's setup of the universe or whatever. So what they do is they follow custom and example. So they follow what other people are doing, and they follow sort of the way that societies generally treat things as right and wrong. Right? Sort of the traditions, the habits, the mores of a society. It says, because grown strong and stubborn, they appeal from custom to reason, and from reason to custom. So he says, look, once we start getting into situations where there is a conflict, we switch between custom and reason, and they're not always the same. They don't always tell us the same thing. So we switch from them as it serves their turn, right? So we appeal to reason or we appeal to custom. So we can sometimes criticize tradition, right? And sometimes we follow tradition. Sometimes we say this is the right thing to do because that's how we do it here or something. Or this is the way that this is the American way to do it. That's a tradition, right? Un-American to do it that way. Okay, that's an appeal to tradition. But then sometimes we say, we have a whole elaborate argument about criticizing that. Well, people say it's un-American, but really, whatever, right? What was it? Obama like years ago said paying tax, paying taxes was patriotism or something, right? That was like, it's a way of criticizing the old view of government and the people sort of being opposed to each other, right? And saying like, no, the real, true American thing to do is to support your government and to like live together under it. So it's a way to invoke reason, to reinterpret custom or something. Anyway, Hobbes says we can do one or the other, right? We can criticize custom or we can appeal to custom, and guess what? We do one or the other as it fits our wants and our needs and our desires, right? As it suits us. So as it serves their turn. Receding from custom when their interest requires it, and setting themselves against reason as often as reason is against them, which is the cause that the doctrine of right and wrong is perpetually disputed by the pen and the sword. So that's also why we disagree so much, because it turns out that lots of us, when we think about right and wrong, we interpret it as kind of in light of what's good for us. And we talked a bit last time about that. Like, there's psychologically actually pretty good evidence for this. But. So, Hobbes says, yeah, sure, we have conscience, but this is really tricky stuff, right? And we can always sort of justify our actions if it fits what we really want. Like, you might think people should give a lot of money to charity. Did I give a lot of money to charity last year? Not a lot. And so then, well, but last year was I had a kid, so it was an expensive year. Yeah. It's a story. It's not a horrible story, right? But of course, I'm telling it primarily to soothe my conscience, right? Not because that's the truth. I was looking for an excuse. That's his point. And so you might think we have this sort of moral compass that's going to prevent the state of nature from happening. So don't count on it. You come across that person, you might think murder is wrong, but then I didn't really have time to find out, and yeah, okay, so you go to sleep. He might be wrong about this, right? But that's his answer. All right. Highlighting this just to make sure that we get where precisely the cause of the state of nature lies for Hobbes. Right? So it's not that people are evil because they have sin in them or something. It's not because people don't care about morality. They do. But it's just these are not, this is not the source and this is not a real barrier, he thinks. So. All right, to end this. So here's two possible lessons, right? Obviously, if Hobbes is right about the state of nature, if he analyzes it correctly, it cannot be anything but horrible. Right? Horrible, not just like slightly crappy or something, not the worst. If not, then either one of his starting assumptions is mistaken, but which one? Remember we had the three simple ones, right? Like there is no government, so that's by definition true. Then we had the rough equality between people. The third one, I forgot the third one. Oh yeah, right. So if push comes to shove, we'll choose ourselves over the others, right? Or maybe the analysis of the state of nature as a straightforward prisoner's dilemma is mistaken. But why? Either way, we're going to be learning something, right? Like if we learn that one of these three initial assumptions is mistaken, those seem pretty straightforward, and so we're learning that something that seemed pretty straightforward actually is false. Or if the analysis of the state of nature is mistaken, then although prisoner's dilemmas might happen, the situation might not be as horrible after all. And there's something more subtle going on. But now we're learning something. This prisoner's dilemma analysis was already teaching us something interesting. Now we're learning something even more interesting. So one reason why I'm spending a lot of time on trying to get Hobbes right. There's a lot of interesting stuff in the offing here. So we have an idea? Which one? Like, where would you go? 1 or 2? 2A or B?
Like, which one are we doing for what?
Well,
Looks wrong, and which one looks
do you think Hobbes is right about the state of nature, or do you think he's wrong? Alan?
I personally think he's wrong.
Wrong?
Yeah, because I was always taught that humans are social creatures. That's how we survived, adapted, and evolved as a species. And I'm pretty sure the ancient humans millions of years ago didn't have any concept of a formal state.
Mm-hmm.
But they still survived. They still formed little societies within themselves without any formal state, and they didn't kill each other. They survived together, and
Right, good.
that's how we're here now. If his state of nature is true, then the human race wouldn't have lasted long.
That's interesting. Yeah, so you're saying like something has to be wrong because if he's right, we wouldn't, like you and I wouldn't exist. We would have never come out of the beginning point would have been the end point because we would have killed each other, right? Or at least kept each other down. Dominic?
I think the main point of the examiner is his claim is that morality is driven from laws, when I think in fact it's actually the other way around. Because if it is, as he said, morality is driven from laws, then yeah, we probably live in that state of nature. But if you put morality before the laws, then that can explain why people might not actually act as good as he says. And I think if you critically examine that part of his argument, I'm not saying it entirely falls apart, but I think to me that's the premise or claim that you would want to attack if you're going to disagree with Hobbes.
Yeah, so in terms of,
So I guess
so far we haven't really talked about justice or morality yet, right? We're
Well,
just
I would say
describing the
yeah,
situation.
I would say that would go against one of his pre-starting assumptions when he says like there's no higher power to make people act a certain way. I would say that one's probably, well, it's true there's no higher power to actually closely work on people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to all of a sudden act immorally because there's no higher power, no laws, and therefore no injustices, as he says. I think again that's mistaken as well because just because there's no government doesn't necessarily mean people are going to act completely immorally.
So you're more optimistic than Hobbes when he says, like, well, this moral compass of ours, it's kind of it's our self-interest thinly disguised.
Yeah, because if you look at the morality laws and how they differ, they typically, even in contemporary times, they split. And people are like, okay, yeah, well, the law says this, but what should we actually do? There's this moral ought to dilemma that we're looking at. And if we can say, okay, yeah, well, the legal aspect is saying this, there's the moral aspect that is saying something completely different, and that's what you should probably examine on why we're acting a certain way with the moral oughts to it. So, it's interesting, but I think that little flip is where you probably want to attack it.
You want to say Tyler? Is that right?
Kind of like what you brought up earlier with the person who's like spending the time to sow his seeds, and then the family comes up. So it seems like, although there might not be any like formal agreement for like organizing structure, there are those like family structures. There are some kind of like almost like proto-government, proto-organizational structures, and so I don't know. It seems like it could be both at the same time. Like it has structure, but it doesn't. Like I don't know. It's kind of messy, but.
Right. So would that be enough to get out of it, like to get rid of the horrible part at least, you think?
Well, it's a little bit, obviously. I mean,
Right.
It wouldn't be quite as horrible for the family to be attacking this one guy. I mean, it might be horrible for the guy, but in the end, it'd be a victory for them. It'd be great. You know?
Right, yeah. So he says solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. At least the solitary part we can
Yeah.
calm down a little bit on that, maybe. Yeah.
But I don't know. It's not the same, obviously, as having a full formal structure.
Right, right. Yeah, Cameron, and I'll continue.
It sort of depends on do you believe the chicken came first or the egg came first. I find it hard to believe that an entire public institution came out of the womb of a woman on day one. I mean, obviously we had to have been able to form some sort of bonds because humans are social creatures. It's not to say that all of Hobbes' conclusions are wrong, but at least the part where he says that we just would not be able to interact because naturally people are so introverted and dead set on protecting themselves that they can't see past their nose, that they're paralyzed by their short-term passions.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't view it that way.
Kayla?
This kind of goes off, like I think I agree with what you guys were saying, but it kind of based off of how Hobbes says morality is driven off the law. I mean, yeah, morality is driven from the law, and then we say the law is driven from morality.
Well, yeah, so that's saying, how is saying, so you have the laws, they predate morality, there's the morality about the laws before the laws. And I say that, I'm saying that's probably one of the kind of how I want to tackle a little bit, because that was something that was just skeptical. I mean, so morality, I'm saying morality like predates the laws, people try to line them all up with moral premises.
Law is the moral minimum.
Exactly.
Well, so yeah, well, it's more than that, right? So for Hobbes, justice is whatever the law says. So justice equals following the law, injustice equals breaking the law. And there is no give or take or wiggle room either way. Sorry, let her finish hers. I don't know.
So kind of like, I think it's kind of a two-way street, because one, you know, I feel like if there weren't any laws, then there would be a lot less incentive to be moral, because a lot of the incentive from being moral comes from the law's consequences. However, we wouldn't have those laws, I feel like, unless we saw that there was a need from them,
Mhm.
kind of from a moral compass type of view. So in that way, I feel like the laws came from morals. So I feel like it's a two-way street between, it's like a kind of a sort of cool feng shui where like they have
Two
their
polar
line on
approach.
each other. So I don't think it's necessarily as black and white as one came from the other.
Right.
It's a continuing.
Okay. Yeah, I should make one side note to what I just said, by the way, that like justice and the law are the same thing for Hobbes, with one exception, the exception being if the law tries to kill you, right? So the whole point for him is that it's safer than death. Shoot the sovereign try to kill you, then of course all bets are off. So we'll see that more, and that's actually the part of Hampden that I was hoping us to read for today, but we didn't talk about. So one of the critics of Hobbes in his day, bizarrely now to our eyes maybe, but is like Hobbes thinks basically any government, including the strongest dictator, is going to be better than the state of nature, right? So you want, like Leviathan is, you want the government to be as strong as possible, because that's what you need to make people stop. Like as we see, the whole problem is that there is no strong power around, right? So you want a real strong power. And then this character called Bishop Bramhall wrote that it was that Hobbes was like a rebel's catechism. Basically, he said like this is a. He read Hobbes and he said this is unacceptable. This is like a complete inciting of the revolution. This work. So today we'd like wait what? It's the exact opposite of what we read it to be. But his thought was like Hobbes is committed to saying that if the sovereign tries to kill you, then all bets are off. And so he thought you can't have that, right? So you can't have the death penalty because that means you're free to escape if you can. It's hard to have an army, right? If you think they order you into a very dangerous battle, you're on the front line. They say march, and it's not clear that that is a binding order anymore in Hobbes' view. So there are real problems there anyway for what justice and injustice would look like. But apart from that, anything else, apart from when they try to kill you, for Hobbes, morality, justice is what the law says. Now, he does think that that's true because this is in your rational self-interest. Right? It's in your rational self-interest to accept the law as the settling or the determinant of justice. Because disagreements about justice are precisely what get people fighting. And so we all need to just say, let's set aside our own personal views. We'll just go with whatever the law says. And that'll be the only way we can actually stably have peace. But more on that next time, as we're getting too far afield. Yeah, Dominic, and then I'll come.
Well, I mean, it seems kind of like an issue you might already settled, where you look at like you look more into the Republic when it's like Socrates and Louis talking, and Louis says it's whatever just as whatever's advantageous to the stronger, and Socrates says no, it's actually what's advantageous to the weaker.
Mm-hmm.
And what it seems like Hobbes was committed to saying it's advantageous to the stronger. When I mean you can just read the dialogue and see how that just brings it all apart.
Yeah, I think strictly speaking, for Hobbes, it will be justice is whatever is advantageous to all of us. So, because the law has to be in the rational interest of everybody to follow.
But if morality is driven from whatever the law says, then it's possible that the lawmakers could make mistakes and make fallacies when making laws, and then you don't know which laws to follow, the good ones and the bad ones.
So that's why you have to follow all of them.
Yeah, but then you start following these fallacious laws, and then it seems to kind of like go against each other. Morality is driven from the laws.
What's going against what? It's a simple story so far, I'm hearing.
Wait, but it's okay. So if the lawmakers, if it's possible for the lawmakers to make mistakes. So
Mistakes? What do you mean mistakes?
So like implement a bad law.
Bad why? What's bad about it?
To implement a bad law, so like.
What would make this law bad?
So unjust tax. So like you get.
It's not unjust. It's justice is what the law says.
But that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. That's not what justice is, though.
Well, well, you might think that, and I might think something very different, and we'll end up fighting, so it's better for us to just follow the law. That's Hobbes' story, right?
I guess. I'm saying his view on justice might be slightly skewed and probably re-examined.
Right, but if we're going to do that, right, we have to get out of the argument first, right? So he's saying, look, in a state of nature, and again, we'll go back to this in more detail, but in a state of nature, life is horrific, right? So this alternative where the justice is determined by the law, it's in your interest. It's better for you to follow that. And it's also better for me and it's better for everybody. Because the alternative is the worst, basically, right? So it's the worst possible outcome is the state of nature, so this is better. Right? Can't do any worse than that. Unless the law tries to kill you, but then all bets are off. So that's one. Now you might think, well, the taxation is unjust. Well, unjust by what standard? Your individual standard, like your belief about what's just or unjust. You might have a belief, but I might have a belief. And if we're going to insist on our own beliefs, we end up fighting again, and then we're back in the state of nature. And we're trying to get out of that, right? So that's why he says you check your morality at the door, basically, right? Like you come live into political society, you check your ethics at the door, and we follow this. So if we want to get out of that, we have to show that this problem of disagreement maybe is not as bad as Hobbes thinks it is. But that will involve showing that prisoner's dilemmas aren't as bad as Hobbes think they are, right? Or the state of nature, anarchy isn't as bad as Hobbes thinks. So we're back in a way to this argument here. We still have to deal with the alleged chaos. Right? Michaela, and then I come to you.
So like with a bad law, but okay, so Hobbes says everything the government says is just unless they try to kill you. But what if a bad law, through complex ways, eventually ends to your death? Like for example, if the law is saying, this may all be different. Let's say the law is saying like all Muslims are evil. Exterminate, like kill them, and they're like, oh, that must be just. Well, in that way, that could then not only kill a bunch of individuals there, but it could also start a war, which then kills you. So in that sense, it would be a bad law, which would make not everything.
Or minimum wage would be a penny a day. There could be a whole host of other bad laws. I'm just saying, like, morality is the laws, but I mean, he has a good argument, but that's just me reinforcing.
Yeah. So in all those cases, the question is like, the real question is, should you obey this law, right? Like, are you bound by it? So there is this person who calls himself a sovereign, trying to boss you around. Like, what should we do? And Hobbes said you should obey this person. For all cases where obeying is a better deal for you than not obeying. So that means we have to compare obeying to the alternative. Now the alternative, he says, is the worst, right? Because of this argument. So people, they say this minority, let's say the law says this minority needs to be killed. Well, for them, it turns out that the law is just as bad or maybe even potentially worse than state of nature, because now they have not just random people, but they have the sovereign coming after them. That's dangerous. So they're off the hook, right? For them, it's no longer a good deal. So they get to resist, they get to fight, they get to try to topple them, they get to try to start their own, they get all sorts of stuff. And we might think, well, wait a minute, now we're at war, and if war is really that dangerous for us, then we're off the hook too, right? So there are some limits to it, but anything else, so if the minimum wage is set too low for your taste, well, is too low mean still better than state of nature? Yes, then suck it up.
If you have a government acting unjustly and oppressing the people,
Yeah, and so nothing in Hobbes would, like, if we take Hobbes seriously and give him, like, read him charitably, nothing would be preventing him from saying, like, look, there's all sorts of ways to reform the state, right? We can petition our politicians. There is a court system. Maybe you can challenge some laws through the court system. As long as you keep doing this within the law, right? This is fine. The one thing you don't get to do, right, is start disobeying and step outside of the system. Start to appeal to you, say, well, I have justice in my hand. Right? Like, I know that I'm in the right here, and I'm going to do something that's against the law in name of justice. That's the one thing that you can't do. So, Michaela, yeah, and then, sorry, Alan, actually, you had your hand up a while. You've been patient.
What would you say about human rights if the state says it's lawful to enslave people? You know, we're not killing the slaves. We need them out there. We need them doing the work. Would he have any problems with that? I think Aristotle was the one who wrote about that there are natural slaves.
Yeah.
That people are just born to be slaves. Is Hobbes kind of like that? Like, there's no sort of thing of human rights. It's like if slavery helps the state, then slavery is just.
So there's two things here. One is about slaves being natural or not, right, or artificial, like created by people. And the other one is whether Hobbes would accept slavery in a Hobbesian society, right? So Hobbes is very clear. He's not like Aristotle. He does not believe that there are natural slaves, right? So if you remember in Hampton, the first Hampton that we read for last time, she says when Hobbes talks about the natural equality between people, he's making 2 points. One is about sort of the rough strength that leads to the prisoner's dilemma, but he's also making a moral point, she thinks. He's making a moral point saying there are no natural bosses among us. Right? So there's no divine kings that say, because I'm born in this family, I'm better than you, I get to be the... No, the king is whoever gives you the goods, is actually the one that makes you safe. Right? So he's very worried, for example, about these cases where you have one king here and then you have some sort of other bloodline that's sort of hiding in Paris and then saying, we are the rightful heirs to the throne, and then you have these legitimacy struggles. You're not in power, you're done, like out. There's no bloodline legitimacy, right? So that's with kings, but it's also with slaves and slave owners, right? Just because you have a certain color of skin doesn't mean that you're better or worse than others. We're all equal, and whatever differences in society happen have to be justified against that background. And that's what the social contract story is about. Right? Now, he thinks what it takes to justify society is just to show that it's a rational, good deal. Right? So we have to wonder whether slaves are living in a situation that is better, good enough, compared to the state of nature. And I don't know off the top of my head if he has anything to say about slavery himself explicitly, but we can think about cases where slavery on the plantations is likely not much better than the state of nature, and potentially worse, right? If there's whippings and stuff involved, maybe you might prefer just to fight for yourself. And in those cases, that's just like the sovereign is trying to kill you, right? In those cases, there are really, like I said, all bets are off for him. So I think I'd have to check if he has something explicit to say about it. My guess would be that there is that most forms of slavery that we'll be thinking about would be illegitimate to him. Right. Now, there are other things that you might worry about that are not quite slavery but are still pretty bad. Think about sort of the Indian caste society, right, where you have these layers in society with the untouchables living pretty badly but not slavery badly. Now that might be acceptable, right? So I'm not trying to say like Hobbes will get you to your human rights utopia, paradise. Probably, like he'll probably accept much worse. Again, within that society, you can try your best to like make it better, right? But you have to accept that you have to work within the law to do that. So if you think that human rights are some sort of code by which you can say, I'm going to follow always the human rights and not what the law tells me, that's a mistake, he thinks. Until we get to state of nature horror, right? Then all bets are off. But anything else, you have to follow the law. And you can work, and you can campaign, and you can petition, and you can do what you can be an activist all day long, but you don't get to disobey. So, okay. Michaela? Yeah. Oh, sorry, Cameron, and then.
Yes, I was going to briefly, because Hobbes had this idea of freedom, once you're in the state, and also except if the state decides they want to kill you. How do you feel about torture? Because that's not quite killing, it's sort of a middle ground, I suppose.
That makes torture sound a lot nicer than. So I think the first time I've said that, it's a middle ground. We'll compromise torture.
Yeah. That's why I put it on there.
I know. I just got a chuckle out of me. Yeah, I don't know. Right, we're trying to reconstruct, try to fit it here in the framework. I think it depends on what kind it is, right? Some people say that torture can be worse than death. And so that would be, since the benchmark we're comparing it to is the threat of death. Presumably, the threat of death is better than actual death, right? If torture is worse than actual death, then it's way worse than the threat of death, right? So then all bets really will be off. But I don't know if that's true for all forms of torture, and so maybe some of it would be possible in the sense that it would not be cause for disobedience or resistance to the sovereign. Again, you can protest it, right? But yeah, McKenna. Yeah.
It seems like in Hobbes's dilemma, it's kind of like the state of nature is the complete worst.
Yes.
So anything that's not the state of nature
Better.
is
Yeah.
better, but at the same time, it seems like it's not reaching the full potential of like good.
Right.
Kind of like
Yeah.
I mean, kind of like in a human rights sense, like whether it be slavery or a dictatorship that's oppressive towards a different group, whether it be like gender or minority or like those things are really, really bad, and it seems like we're just saying like, oh, well, it's better than the state of nature, so it's okay. Like, but that doesn't seem like it makes sense.
Yeah, so it depends a little bit how you think about human rights. But on most views, the way that most people talk about human rights, it does not fit well within a Hobbesian theory at all. You might think that human rights are sort of like is a list of aspirations, sort of a list of like if a society was really good, when it would be like follow these things, right? And some people treat him like that. And then Hobbes could be fine, right? Like you can have all sorts of aspirations and you can vote for them and you can, like that's the same story I've just been telling. If you think that human rights are these sort of eternal, God-given, or maybe natural, or like human in the sense that it's like part of humanity that we have these rights, and these are unalterable, inalienable type rights, well, it's not the right word, but you get my point. If you think that, right, so the point that whenever a government comes after, let's say, pick your favorite human right, right? So maybe you think there's a human right to shelter. So you're homeless, right? Now your human rights are being violated. If you think that gives you cause for like just stealing things, like so that you can build your own shelter or something, so because you think, well, my human rights are being violated, so I don't have to obey the law which protects other people's property anymore, that Hobbes will not accept. Right? Up until the point where if you not having shelter means you're about to get pneumonia, right, because it's raining so hard or something, like then it's death that's threatening again, right? But if it's just like you're cold or you're uncomfortable over that, like I'm not trying to poo-poo that, right? I'm just saying that it's not the threat of death, then you have to obey the law still. Yeah. So go to a homeless shelter or try whatever, right? So do something else is what his point going to be. So sometimes people talk about human rights, so philosophers. You guys and Dominic will know this from the Altman and Wellman book that we read in a class called Ethics in International Affairs I taught last term. Lots of philosophers these days talk about human rights as the limits of state sovereignty. So that these are like this is the outer barrier where no government can legitimately go. Right? So no government can legitimately change, infringe, or alter your human rights. And if they do it, the government loses legitimacy. It's not the rights that lose; it's the government that loses. So if you think that way about human rights, then you're not a Hobbesian. Like it just does not fit in the framework. So, well,
assuming that Hobbes is right about anarchy not being able to be anything but horrible, then government should not be able to to have the right to like oppress people up until the degree of, killing them. Because if the goal of the state is to keep the state and stay out of anarchy, well then you're going to add a threat to the state falling apart by people revolting if they're not happy.
Right.
And people can be, it's true, they don't like being killed. That's a fact. Totally agree with that. But people also don't like being paid a penny a day for minimum wage. So if you give the state complete power aside from killing the citizens, people are going to get upset, and then that's going to threaten the state, because a state without people, that's not a state anymore. And then you go back to anarchy.
Yeah, very good.
So if the goal of the state is to simply remain, then they need to keep the people happy, which is a balance between power in the state, but also power in the people. Because it's all the state, it's all about making the state powerful, then it makes the state weak. I mean, there are some really powerful dictatorships still around, but there's a lot of dictatorships that are not around anymore, because the threat of having your people hate you and be unhappy is that they revolt, and then the state's over.
Yeah, and then often what happens after those dictatorships get toppled is anarchy again, right? Like the civil wars and lots of, yeah. So that's a very, it's a very nice Hobbesian answer. That's very similar to the way that Hobbes himself talks about it. So Hobbes thinks actually our interests are pretty nicely aligned. He discusses this elsewhere in the book. He says, look, the sovereign, this might all sound very grim, right? But you don't have to worry too much, because it's actually in the interest of the sovereign to govern over a stable, happy, and prosperous society. It makes him safer in his power, right? Actually, it makes the society stabler, so it continues power over time. If the society is prosperous, the tax receipts will go up, and that means more wealth and prestige and so on for the sovereign himself too. So that's all. So he says it's really in the interest of the sovereign to make society as good for us as it could be. And he also thinks the flip side of this is he thinks also that even when things aren't so bad, things aren't so good, you might worry about these human rights and like shelter and so on. It sounds all very horrible, but you have to always keep in mind, he thinks, the alternative is back to anarchy. And so that's much worse. So you should work within to make it better, sure. But you can't start stepping outside of the government or the law or the society in order to get what you think is right. Because as soon as everyone starts thinking about, well, I know what's right, we're back to fighting. So, yeah, so he thinks we have an incentive as citizens to try and make society better from within and not by resisting, if we think carefully about what the alternative is. But he also thinks the government themselves also have an incentive to make things better and to work with us as people to make it better, because that makes them stabler in their position a bit. Yeah. And for them also, if the whole thing dissolves, they're back in a state of nature too, so that's like the relative drop is even bigger. They go from palace to burning buildings, right? One thing I should say, by the way, like we've talked so far about the sovereign or the Leviathan or the government as if it's a dictator. Hobbes says it can be a dictator, but it can also be, it can be a group, it could be some type of junta type thing, but it could also just be a parliament of like rotating people. It could be, so it consists, as long as you just have, the institution has to be set up, that there's a strong power at the top. Now, who occupies that power? It could be one person, it could be 3 people, it could be 25, it could be 150, right? It could be, there's various ways you can do this, he thinks. But ultimately, what matters is what comes down from the top for you as a citizen. That's, unless it's worse than death or just as bad as death, you work from within. Yeah, Michael? Then I'm going to continue, but this is good.
So, like, in a democracy where the citizens have the power to change the government, in a sense, how would Hobbes see that? Because I guess that, in a sense, is going against the government, in a sense, because you're changing the government.
Yeah, it's not, so yeah, the citizens might have the power to change the government in a democracy, and that's fine with him as long as it goes within the law. Yeah, so there's lawful ways of changing the law, right? So you might challenge it in the courts, you might vote for different people, you might lobby the politicians. So these are all ways that he should be in principle fine with. The thing he's really worried about, and he actively argues against, is what he calls divided sovereignty. So the United States Constitution has the checks and balances system, right? Where you have different branches of government deliberately pitted against each other. So the legislative branch is supposed to check the executive branch, right? And the judiciary, Supreme Court, is supposed to check the legislative branch and so on. Right? No, that's really dangerous, he thinks. Because he thinks now you're going to have a fight between each of these branches about who's the top dog. Right? And remember, this whole thing was supposed to be a solution to the fighting, and now we've built fighting into the very solution. This is a really bad idea. Right? So you want to group as much power together into the one top, whether it's one person, 20 people, or a parliament chosen 150 or something. But they have all the power. You can't start dividing that further into parts. Now, just like not everyone is convinced that the state of nature will be as anarchic and horrible as he thinks it is, his prediction that this type of system will be inevitably unstable also doesn't seem to be true, right? Like, what is it we're going on there?
It seems like if there's a smaller group of people that have a huge amount of power, it seems like that would be more dangerous than
Right.
a larger group.
Yeah, Locke, we'll see, Locke actually says this, like Locke mocks Hobbes in his book. He says, well, you know, someone like Hobbes, he's the phrase he has this, it's a strange, it's not funny or anything, but it's a strange sentence he uses, like, it's like recommending to people who are afraid of pole foxes that they give themselves over to lions. That's the, so, yeah, so I think it's really stupid. Right. Yeah. So Locke is way more. If you like things like human rights and so on, then Locke might be much more up your alley than Hobbes will be.
Wouldn't Hobbes like support our system of democracy if you presented it as the three branches are not the ones in power. The ones in power are the people that vote them there. For example, he could argue that, well, no. Take the president, for example. He's one person with a concentrated amount of power, but if he does something that we really don't like, then he gets impeached, he gets booted, and that's not real power. The real power is people that can take away any of people's power in any of the three branches. I guess except for Supreme Court justices, but that's like the whole thing.
Yeah, so well, for power for him ultimately means sort of like who has the weapons, right? Like when push comes to shove. Like who has the biggest gun.
Doesn't Bill Clinton get impeached? Or well, almost when push comes to shove, if the people don't like
Well, think about it this way. Like if push comes to shove means like this, right? So the government says one thing and you say something else. Who wins? Right? So the government says it's what? So you're it's January, so your tax documents will be coming in. Right? So the April, it's tax day. You owe $7,000, and you say heck no, and they say yes, and you say heck no. Who wins that fight? Right? That's the one.
But isn't that only to a certain extent? Because what if the government was like, hey, just so you guys know, we're going to invade every country. We'd be like, no. And then those people would be kicked out of office. There's a reason that they have to campaign and they have to go kiss babies and stuff. Because at the end of the day, any amount of power they have, they only have it because we gave it to them.
But how are you going to stop the people who are actually soldiers that are in the streets who go to
Soldiers are the people.
Yeah, but you're talking about we as not the soldiers attempting to stop them from invading other people. They are literally the ones with the guns in their hands, like the soldiers and the government. We can't go and try to stop a battleship just by ourselves.
No, but the battleship is manned by the people. Those are the people that are on the battleship and with the guns. At the end of the day.
So it sounds, well, it's this big discussion, but it sounds that the people keeps changing, right? Like you plug in, like the people is an abstract concept. It's not someone who we can like point to. Like this is.
Yeah, but yeah.
And so what he thinks is we need to have ultimately some designated location that has a lot more power to keep other designated people into check. Now, of course, there might be like the scenarios in which the Leviathan could be overpowered even, or like could act in such ways that they lose their power. Those scenarios are imaginable, sometimes have happened. But his goal is to create something that is going to be as stable and as powerful as we can get it. so that in most situations it'll keep the peace. Now, there's maybe no guarantee for all time, but the stronger and the more stable we get it, the better it is, because the stronger the guarantee that we're going to have peace in our society. And he thinks the government that we have in the United States is a bad idea because okay, so it's been, what, almost 300 years or something, stable. It's pretty good. But maybe we're lucky, right? Maybe tomorrow is the bad day that it all goes wrong. Maybe 50 years from now it's the day. Maybe when Trump gets elected it's the day that it all goes wrong. Who knows, right? It could be stronger, he thinks, because we've built cracks into the building. But the checks and balances are cracks. They're designed to be cracks. Right? They're supposed to keep one branch of government from becoming too powerful. He says you cannot be too powerful. You cannot be too powerful. You want it to be as powerful as you can get it, because the more powerful it is, the longer and the more situations it can overcome. All right. This took longer than I thought, but it was good. One thing I'll say quickly before we end. Hampton's reading that we had for last time, for Tuesday, she offers an argument for why 2B might be the right answer. So why you might think that the state of nature isn't quite as bad as I've been advocating. And this is the discussion we had last time too. That maybe when we know, consider this example of a prisoner's dilemma, right? I've used this in another class. Can I use your pencil quickly? So, all right. I propose a trade to justice. I want your pad, like your writing block, your writing thing. What do you call those things? I don't know.
Notebook.
Notebook. Thanks. Jeez. And let's imagine for a moment you really like this pencil, right? So I say, I'll sell you my pencil if you will give me your notebook. Deal? Yeah? Yeah, exactly. And I say, I want a notebook, so it's a deal. Okay. Okay, give me the notebook. So you do it? Okay, so this is really stupid, right, says Hobbes. Because now I'm saying, okay, later. Right? So Hobbes says you will never, so let's do it again. Like, hey, Justice, can I have the notebook? I'll give you your pencil. You'll say, sure. Well, you probably suggest that I give you the pencil first, right? I'm going to say, no, you give me the notebook first. You say, give me the pencil first. Give me the notebook first, right? So let's try, right? Right? So, it's like, and if that doesn't happen, right, we might, so this is not, so his point is, in the end, probably this exchange doesn't take place, right? We'll see next time he actually writes explicitly, like if you have a contract, like this is a mini contract, right? It's irrational and therefore not allowed for you to go first, unless there is police or the law that you can go to if I cheat you, right? So you should not have done that, whatever, like you do now. Of course, it's not stupid today because we have, like, this is obviously an example, and it's a situation in which there is a state and a society, so it's a different situation. If we were in a state of nature, it would have been a wrong thing for you to do, he says. So here's one reason why you might still do it, right? Why might you still give, and this is, like, you do these things naturally because we are accustomed to this. Hampton says, so I said to you, okay, can I have the notebook? You say, yeah, I'll have the pencil, okay. You say, can I have the pencil first? I might do it because I think, I also have a coat there. Maybe you like that one, and I like your bag. And then I have a bag, like a rucksack there. And you have one. You have a chair, and I like. So there's more trades to be happening, right? And I know, of course, if I cheat you once, we saw this already. The second time, you don't fall for it anymore. Right? So now, if I say, well, give me the notebook first, and you give me the notebook, I'll probably hand you the pencil. So that I know next time he'll trust me, because now I also want to get his chair, right? And I can get it for my coat, and so on and so on, right? So that's, thank you. That's the point about an iterated prisoner's dilemma, right? If the situation is the same each and every time there's this problem about who's going to go first. But Hampton says, if we know that we're going to be in a series of these things, that actually changes the game. That makes it rational to cooperate. Because the gains are better over time, and you don't have to, so because the gains are better, it becomes rational to cooperate, basically. It's not quite clear how that works. If you have, for example, if I tell you there are going to be 3 total, and after 3 we end, then we know, well, the third one is the one where it's rational to cheat. But then I shouldn't wait for the third one. I should cheat on the second one, because I know if I cooperate on the second one, I'm going to get cheated on the third. So I start cheating on the second. But then I think, okay, well, he's going to start cheating on the second, so I'll cheat on the first. So it kind of zips back. So it's kind of tricky. What exactly are the conditions? So you have to not, there has to be sort of like a vagueness about when it'll come to an end, and the gains have to be enough. And so, but there are ways where you can have this. Now, if the state of nature is like that, where we have this sort of open-ended cooperations, then maybe it wouldn't be as horrible as Hobbes says. And of course, if it's not as horrible, then all the other arguments about human rights and so on, they all disappear, right? Because now the alternative isn't so bad anymore. Hampton's own argument is this. She says, yeah, it is an iterated prisoner's dilemma, but the problem is you can only have this if you kind of know each other, and I know that I'm going to see you again, and you'll remember me, and so on. So with some people in small groups, you can have cooperation. And so small groups might sort of live together stably, but once societies get kind of big, even a couple dozen people, maybe 100 or so, there's some anonymity, and we might not know each other all personally. We might not know if I come across you again, and then it breaks down because there's too much uncertainty again. So keep that in mind when you read it. She says this stuff is it's an assurance game. You basically, what you want is you want the type of assurance that I can trust you to be the first one to move. It won't solve everything. You might still get state of nature be pretty bad, but it's not as bad as Hobbes maybe says. All right. Next time we'll talk more about the government and justice. So, thanks.